Okay, as I get through here. And good afternoon. My name is Evan Weiner. I just got back from Seattle where I saw my granddaughter last week. And you're the third group that I've seen since I've come back.
Wow.
I did one yesterday and two today. So this is my fourth talk since yesterday. But anyway, how many of you are going to celebrate Cinco de Mayo on Sunday? You know what Cinco de Mayo is?
Yeah.
Yes.
Mayonnaise.
Mayonnaise. You're probably close to that.
The 5th of May.
Yeah, the 5th of May, and there's a big celebration in the United States, but not really in Mexico. It's a minor holiday in Puebla, which is a city in Mexico, and it is a holiday all about beer. That's what it's about, beer. Mexicans don't celebrate it, but a beer company celebrated it. In America, Cinco de Mayo is evolved to become one of the country's largest drinking holidays. 2013, over $600 million worth of beer was sold in one day, according to the Nielsen data, which is more beer that is sold for St. Patrick's Day or the Super Bowl that year. So this is a beer holiday. That's all it is. It was invented by a beer company. The American celebration really has nothing to do with the Battle of Puebla, when the ragtag Mexican army executed an unlikely defeat of the better equipped French forces at the Battle of Puebla. That was on May 5th, and that was in 1862. So basically what you're celebrating is a beer holiday created by an advertising agency. But this is Cinco de Mayo. It's all about beer. Cinco de Mayo is often mistaken for the Mexican Independence Day, which is on September 16th. On that date, 1810 was the year Mexico declared its independence from Spanish rule. Cinco de Mayo is celebrated only sporadically in Mexico, mainly in the southern town of Puebla and a few larger cities. It's no big deal. Go to Mexico City next Sunday, May 5th. Maybe some bar will celebrate it, but it's no big deal. Cinco de Mayo is all about beers, particularly this beer right here, Corona beer, because some advertising guy said, how do we sell more beer in America? Just how do we do that? How do we sell this Mexican beer? And they're thinking, and they're thinking, and they're thinking, what can we do? Hey, I know! It's springtime. Let's get the beer out and rolling for springtime. Maybe there'll be more sales. Cinco de Mayo gained first popularity in the United States in the 1950s and 60s. The holiday's popularity grew in the 1960s when Mexican-American or Chicano activists embraced the holiday as a way to build pride among Mexican Americans. This is Ensenada, which is about 90 miles south of San Diego, and another beer company. But they didn't capitalize on Cinco de Mayo. In the 1980s, the commercialization of Cinco de Mayo, the beer companies in the United States started to market a campaign, and Cinco de Mayo became a drinking holiday for many people in the United States. Independence Day, September 16th. How many people in the United States know what day Independence Day is in Mexico? Probably close to 3 or 4. But how many know Cinco de Mayo? An awful lot of people. The beer campaign worked. It absolutely worked. In the United States, Cinco de Mayo is widely interpreted as a celebration of Mexican culture and heritage, particularly in the areas with substantial Mexican-American populations. Partiers mark the occasion with parades, parties, music, Mexican folk dancing, traditional foods such as tacos and mole poblano. Anybody gonna have any tacos here on Sunday? Celebration of Cinco de Mayo? And this is Mexico, and there I am under the Mexican flag. Mexico is more than the home of Cinco de Mayo. It's a country rich in history, tradition, and culture. Mexico is made up of 31 states and 1 federal district. It is the 3rd largest country in Latin America and has one of the largest populations, more than 100 million, making it the home of more Spanish speakers than any other nation in the world. Evidence of past cultures and events are apparent everywhere you go in Mexico. Many of Mexico's rural areas are still inhabited by indigenous people whose lifestyles are quite similar to those of their ancestors. In addition, many pre-Columbian ruins still exist throughout Mexico. Well, I'm not sure if that's pre-Columbian or prefabricated. Let's call it prefabricated. That's in Cozumel in Mexico. The Mayan civilization was just one of many civilizations that once called the area known as Mexico home. The Mayans were considered to be pre-Columbian, America's most brilliant civilization, and they thrived between, say, 250 and 900 AD, which goes against the narrative that Columbus discovered America in 1492, if they were in the Americas in 250 and 900. They developed a calendar, a writing system, and built cities that functioned as hubs for the surrounding farming towns. Religion played a central role in Mayan life, and altars were carved with significant dates, histories, elaborate human and divine figures. The Mayan civilization collapsed in the early 10th century, likely due to overpopulation and damage to the ecological balance of the area. Remember a number of years ago, the Mayan calendar, and how some people said, it ends in a few weeks. Civilization's gonna end. We're all gonna die. Because the Mayan calendar, remember? It's over. It's totally over. Forget your wills. Nobody's gonna be around to collect the money anyway. The Mayan calendar is a dating system that was used by the civilization. It served as the basis for all other calendars used in ancient Mexican and Central American civilizations. The Mayan calendar was based on a ritual cycle of 260 named days in a year of 365 days. Consecutive years were then considered to form a longer cycle of 18,980 days, or 52 years of 365 days. The longer cycle was called a calendar round. December 21st, it's the first day of winter or summer, if you're in the southern hemisphere. December 21st, 2012, that was gonna be it. The end of the world. The end of the world, prepare for it. Well, that was the end of the calendar. Some people interpret that as when the world was going to end. Let's see, today is April 29th, 2024, so 11 and a half years later, I can safely say, I don't think the world ended. That's the Aztec civilization, the Aztecs. The Aztecs, the last of the pre-Columbian Mexican great native civilizations, rose to prominence in the Central Valley of Mexico around 1427. That was a little before Columbus time, right? 1427, that would be, what, 85 years before Columbus, by partnering with the Toltecs and what is left of the Mayans. This triple alliance conquered smaller cultures in the east and the west until the Aztec Empire spanned Mexico from the Pacific Ocean to the Gulf Coast. At their height, the Aztecs ruled 5 million people, and there was a tightly structured system of self-supporting units called the Capuli. Each unit had its own governing council, schools, army, temple, and land, but paid tribute to the supreme leader of the empire. Influenced by earlier Mexican civilizations, the Aztecs conducted extraordinary religious ceremonies that featured dances, and there was processions and sacrifices. Sorry, Joe, Sorry, Jose, you're the one that we're going to sacrifice this year. But that's okay, you know, the rest of your family will be here. Just, you know, we got to do it. They founded in what is now Mexico's capital city, Mexico City. And the Aztecs collapsed, just the civilization would fall apart. And it fell apart rather quickly. The catalyst for the empire's collapse was the arrival of the Spaniards in Mesoamerica. The first Spaniards arrived in 1715 with 3 ships and about 400 men. 1519, a small Spanish army led by a minor nobleman by the name of Herman Cortez invaded Mexico and claimed it for the Spanish crown. He quickly formed alliances with the non-Aztec indigenous elites hostile to the Aztec domination, and by 1521, the Spanish and their local allies captured and utterly destroyed the Aztec Empire's major cities, including its capital. Cortez, Spain, it becomes New Spain. And if you remember anything about the early days of America, even after 1776, only went to the Appalachians in as far south as Georgia, and the upper Canada was still part of England. The Spanish ruled a great deal of the North American continent. The Aztec land was incorporated into the Spanish Empire. Christianity was brutally enforced. Virtually all remaining Aztec books, especially religious ones, were publicly burned. That would, of course, be repeated centuries later, burn the books. And the people caught hiding them were in mortal danger of being arrested for witchcraft. Salem witch trials in Massachusetts, or Maine actually now. Witchcraft was a big deal in North America, wasn't it? And burned at the stake by the Inquisition. By 1574, Spain controlled a large portion of the Aztec Empire and had enslaved most of the indigenous population. The diseases brought to the society by the Spaniards devastated the indigenous population of Nueva España, killing an estimated 24 million people between 1521 and 1605. Concerned that the Catholic Church overgrowing power, King Carlos of Spain, King Carlos III, expelled Jesuits from New Mexico in the late 1700s, New Mexico being the country, not the state. Francis Napoleon Bonaparte's occupation of Spain in 1808 compromised the country's political and economic structure, which made Spain very weak, and they were not able to hold on to what would become Mexico. This is Miguel Hidalgo y Castilla, and he is considered the father of modern Mexico. Mexico's independence date commemorated September 16th, the anniversary of the revolutionary priest Hidalgo. The cries of Dolores, a call to arms that amounted to the declaration of war against the Spanish colonial government on that day in 1810. In response, the rebel leader Vicente Guerrero and defected royalist general Agustin de Urquiza collaborated to gain Mexico's independence from Spain in 1821. And together they drafted a Mexican constitution. And there is a statue of Hidalgo in central Mexico when I was there. He started the insurgency. He is kind of, I don't know, he's kind of Ben Franklin, he's kind of George Washington, he's kind of Samuel Adams, he's kind of a lot of people combined in Mexico. In 1811, he was executed shortly after he was captured by the Spanish. By 1820, Mexico is on the verge of independence. The Mexican War of Independence was not a single coherent event, but a featured local and regional struggles that occurred within the same period. It culminated with the drafting of the Declaration of Independence of Mexico, of the Mexican Empire, in Mexico City, September 28, 1821, following the collapse of Spain's local royal government. This is 200 years ago, and we're still facing the same problems of 200 years ago, the United States and Mexico. That's Augustine I of Mexico. After the Treaty of Cordoba gave Mexico its independence, Augustine I entered Mexico City in September 1821, and on May 19, 1822, he's proclaimed Augustine I, Emperor of Mexico. In December 1822, Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna led a revolt against him. On January 4th, 1823, Augustine I signed the first permit for settlement of an Anglo-American settlers in Texas for Stephen F. Austin's colony. Mexico would regret that ever happening. The tables have turned over the 2 centuries, as you're going to see in a minute. There is Santa Anna. Santa Anna overthrew Augustine I, drew up a new constitution that established the Federal Mexican Republic, composed of 19 states and 4 territories. From 1823 to 1836, Santa Anna served as president, squelching Texas' stand for independence in the Battle of the Alamo during his last year in office. Goodbye, Emperor. Augustine I, well, he abdicated on March 19, 1823, and on May 11th, he sailed for Italy. His plan for the Austin colony, however, was permitted to continue with little change, and that mistake that Mexico made 200 years ago is still festering 2 centuries later. Things did not end well for Augustine I. He was unaware of the decree of death awaiting his reappearance in Mexico. He sailed from Europe on May 11, 1824, landed in Mexico at the Sulta Al Marina on July 15th, recognized, captured, shot at Padilla on July 19th. Should have stayed in Italy, still be around to talk about it. Despite the creation of the Mexican nation, Spain still managed to hold on to a port in Veracruz that Mexico did not get control of until November 23rd, 1825. Spanish attempts to reestablish control over Mexico culminated in the 1829 Battle of Tampico, during which a Spanish invasion force was surrounded in Tampico and forced to surrender. It's kind of an odd thing because James Monroe, President of the United States, 201 years ago, declared the Monroe Doctrine and basically said any foreign country, looking at Europeans, who attacked any country in North America, if it wasn't the United States, should consider it an attack on the United States, the Monroe Doctrine, which still holds to this day. And there he is, James Monroe. 1823, United States President James Monroe invoked manifest destiny when he spoke before Congress to warn European nations not to interfere with America's westwards expansion, threatening any attempt by Europeans to colonize the American continents would be seen as an act of war. This policy of American sphere of influence and its non-intervention in European affairs became to be known as the Monroe Doctrine and Mexican independence. In a bid to promote development in 1823, the new Mexican government, free of Spain, encouraged American immigrants to settle in the northernmost province of Texas in the 1820s. Again, they would regret this very quickly. Mexico soon regretted the decision. American settlers arrived in alarming numbers, some 20,000 by the end of the decade, and showed no inclination to either assimilate themselves to Mexican culture or obey Mexican laws banning slavery. The Americans came in and said, we don't need your stinking help here, we'll take care of it. And they tried to get away as quickly as possible, the Americans. Texas is not for sale, and this actually is the size of Texas. It goes all the way up into Wyoming and Colorado and New Mexico, and it's huge. Baja California, and California, Arizona, that's all the states that are around today. It was a huge, huge, huge chunk of territory. In 1827, John Quincy Adams sent orders to his minister in Mexico City to offer the Mexican government $1 million for Texas. We'll take it off your hands, here's $1 million. But the minister, Joe Poinsett, decided to disobey his president's orders. His reasoning? Mexico was certain to reject the offer. He really didn't want to get the Mexicans angry. You know, just leave well enough alone. And they did, briefly. On August 25th, 1829, new president, Andrew Jackson, same deal. Let's buy Texas from Mexico. Jackson's bid was wrapped up in slavery-related politics, with an increasing number of non-slave states entering the Union. Southerners were lobbying to have Texas as a slave state. And that would continue. Cries for re-annexation of Texas. Re-annexation? The United States never had it in the first place. But let's re-annex it. Increased after Mexico, having won its independence from Spain, passed a law suspending U.S. immigration into Texas in 1830. If they could, they would have built a wall to keep the Americans out of Texas. If they could. Well, they didn't. But it seems like it's the same situation today. It hasn't changed all that much. In 1835, the North Americanos rose in revolt, and after a gallant but bloody victory at the Alamo in March 1839, they win a resounding victory over the Mexican general Santa Anna and San Jacinto on April 21st, 1836. Texas proclaims itself as an independent republic. Mexico said, no, you're still a province of this country. You're not going anywhere. And the Texans are saying, watch this. Watch this. You think you're going to keep us there? Just watch us. Mexico said, no, you're part of us. We're not recognizing you. See, I'm dressed in this sport coat. I got a tie on, and I'm riding a bull in Fort Worth. It's Fort Worth, Texas, the stockyards. My wife said, why don't you go on the bull? I said, I'm wearing a sport coat, I have a tie on, I have dress pants on. What's going to happen? Well, the bull might throw you off. Well, he didn't. It was a docile bull, but there I am in Fort Worth, Texas. After Texas won its independence, Andrew Jackson, the president, decided not to press for annexation despite his close friendship with Texas President Sam Houston, because he feared a backlash in the North if he created a new slave state. They were about ready to go to war, or were they, the North and South? On March 4th, 1837, Jackson's final day in office, he recognized the independence of Texas. The Republic of Texas became a sovereign state. On March 2nd, 1836, the Mexicans said, no, you're not. You're a rebellious province, but you're still one of us. And the Texans said, no more. We're gone. Republic of Texas. Oh, your tax dollars at work. This was 2007 when the State Department paid me to speak at the George Bush Presidential Library down in, along with Texas A&M University. And they paid. So you actually paid me to speak down at the George Bush, H.W. Bush Presidential Library. There were 6 flags over Texas. Spain had them 1519 to 1684, 1690 to 1821. France had them 1884 to 1690 for Fort St. Louis, and 1800 to 1803. It was part of French Louisiana. Mexico, well, they had it 1821 to 1835. The Texas Republic, well, they lasted until 1845. Then there was the United States of America, 1845 to 1861. And then Confederate States of America, 1861 to 65, and then they come back into the fold in 1865. Like I said, it's a big area. This is Texas today, right here. This is New Mexico. This is Colorado, Utah, which is outside the border, but this is the border. It is a huge, huge, huge territory. In 1836, there were more Anglo settlers in Texas than Hispanics, and Texas leaders sought to join the United States. Old Hickory, Andrew Jackson, he says no. He says, leave it alone. I'd love to have it, but it's only going to cause problems. The administrations of both Andrew Jackson and his successor, Martin Van Buren, resisted calls, fearing war with Mexico and opposition from Americans who believed calls for annexation were linked with the desire to expand slavery in the Southwest. Jackson had no congressional annexation support during his time and his term, which ended on March 4th, 1837, and Martin Van Buren refrained from annexing Texas after the Mexicans threatened war. The president that came up after Harrison, who died after 31 days, and Van Buren, was John Tyler. And John Tyler wanted Texas. Didn't have much support, but he would go after Texas. John Tyler became the president following the death of William Henry Harrison, 31 days after Harrison was inaugurated on March 4th, 1841. And Tyler soon made the annexation of the Republic of Texas part of his agenda. Tyler had no support. 1844, after Tyler's break with the Whig Party, in 1841, he attempted to return to his old Democratic Party. But its members, especially the followers of Van Buren, were not ready to accept him. U.S. and Britain have a border dispute, and you're going to find throughout this whole time that the Mexican relationship with the Americans is also tied into the British relationship with the United States. That's Bar Harbor, Maine. Tyler continued his predecessor's expansionist policies in the Northwest. He pushed for a chain of forts from Council Bluff, Iowa to the Pacific, but was unable to conclude a treaty with the British to fix the Oregon boundaries. Tyler also wanted the Hawaiian Islands. So you can see that America is on this expansionist path, and Mexico is right in the way of the Americans saying, we want this, we want that, we want this. But the Americans had a British problem before that. I want the Pacific Northwest too. This sets up the Mexican War with the Americans. The Webster-Ashburn Treaty of 1842, negotiated by Secretary of State Daniel Webster, settled a long feud with England where Maine ended and the British rule of what would become Canada began over in New Brunswick. War had narrowly, did you know that 1839 that the Americans and the Brits almost went to war? Yeah, they almost did. The Maine-New Brunswick border. War had narrowly been averted between the two nations on several occasions over border and incursion issues, and the treaty was instrumental in bettering diplomatic relations, except it was only a temporary solution. Van Buren's Democratic Party. 1844, Van Buren's position of not annexing Texas through the nomination to James K. Polk. Polk was Andrew Jackson's protege, and by 1844, Andrew Jackson was in support of adding Texas to the United States. And there is the 11th President of the United States, James K. Polk. Who is James K. Polk? Whigs jeered. Democrats replied, Polk was the candidate who stood for expansion, and that expansion was Texas. He linked the Texas issue, popular in the South, with the Oregon question, which was attractive to the North. Polk also wanted California. You know who owned California? Mexico. The election of 1844, James K. Polk would win. He defeated Henry Clay, the Whig, 170 electoral votes to 105 for Clay. The incumbent, John Tyler, entered 1844 with the intent of running for another term. He was thrown out of the Whig Party in 1842. He had no party. He was on the outside looking in. The Whigs chose Henry Clay, who had run for president, as a national Republican in 1832 and was against the annexation of Texas. The Democrats split over a number of issues, among them the annexation, as well as the use of hard money over paper. Van Buren, who led the hard money faction, which was perceived as anti-business, seemed to be the likely candidate. Polk, who had hoped for a vice presidential nomination, emerged as the Democrats' nominee, with the former minister to Russia, the Pennsylvanian George Mifflin, as his running mate. Polk was the first dark horse presidential candidate. Polk and Clay were slave owners. They avoided the issue of slavery as best they could. Slavery issue arose because of the proposed annexation of Texas and the emerging Liberty Party, anti-slavery party that nominated James Gillespie Birney as its presidential candidate. Polk brushed off the slavery issue by saying, states' rights, whatever the states want, not the federal government. Clay was portrayed as a flip-flopper. Imagine that, 1844 is a flip-flopper. Polk won the election and was given a big gift by Tyler on March the 1st, 1845. Tyler annexes Texas, and that is Dallas, Texas, the school book depository building where Lee Harvey Oswald fired the fatal shots at John Kennedy, November 22nd, 1963. And there's me, and there's my son, just hanging out in Dealey Plaza. 1844, President John Tyler resumed negotiations with the Republic of Texas. His efforts culminated on April 12th in a treaty of annexation, an event that caused Mexico to sever diplomatic relations with the United States. Tyler, however, lacked the votes in the Senate to ratify the treaty, and was defeated by a wide margin in June. Shortly after he left office, Tyler tried again, this time through a joint resolution of both houses. With the support of President-elect James Polk, Tyler managed to get the joint resolution passed on March 1st, 1845, signed it that day. Well, there is James Polk, the new president. Comes into office with 4 goals. Lowering tariffs to help the southern states. That's done in 1846. Establish an independent treasury. Yeah, he does that too in 1845. Settle the Oregon boundary question with Great Britain and acquire California. Tyler basically handed Texas to Polk. Well, while Mexico did not follow through with its threat of declaring war if the United States annexed Texas, relations between the two nations remained tense due to Mexico's disputed border with Texas. Polk decides, you know what, somehow I have to provoke a war. If I can get a war going and we get Mexico, then we get Texas, right? Right? According to the Texans, their state included a significant portion of what is today New Mexico and Colorado, and western and southern portions of Texas itself, which claimed extended to the Rio Grande River. The Mexicans, however, argued that the border only extended to the Nueces River north of the Rio Grande. Texas, Lone Star State, second biggest state, well, it used to be one of the biggest states. It's behind Montana and Alaska in terms of how big it is. And then in July 1845, Polk knows he needs a war to justify taking over Mexico and keeping, or that part of Mexico and keeping it. So he ordered the commander of the U.S. Army in Texas, the General Zachary Taylor, to move his forces to the disputed lands between the two rivers. In November 1845, Polk dispatched Congressman John Slidell to Mexico with instructions to negotiate the purchase of the disputed areas along the Texas-Mexico border and territory comprising the present-day states of New Mexico and California. Texas was admitted to the Union, 28th state, December 29, 1845. Acquisition of California proved to be far more difficult. Polk sent an envoy to offer Mexico up to $20 million, plus settlement of damage claims owed to Americans in return for California and the New Mexico country. Since no Mexican leader could cede half his country and survive, Polk's envoy was not well received. May 1846, Polk used news of skirmishes inside the disputed territory between Mexican troops and Taylor's army to gain congressional support for a declaration of war against Mexico. May 13, 1846, the United States declared war on Mexico. The United States is almost in 2 wars at this point. One definitely Mexico, the other over Oregon. And they decided, you know what, let's negotiate in Oregon and let's go in and take Texas. Mexico, there you go, gas station in Tijuana, Mexico. Following the capture of Mexico City in September 1847, Nicholas Trist, chief clerk of the Department of State and Polk's peace emissary, began negotiations for a peace treaty with the Mexican government under the terms similar to those pursued by Slidell in the previous year. Polk grew concerned because Trist wasn't listening to him. He believed that, Trist believed that he would not press, Polk believed that Trist would not press strong enough on the Mexicans to surrender. And also, Trist was a close friend of General Winfield Scott, a Whig who was thought to be a strong contender for his party's presidential nomination for the 1848 election. Furthermore, the war had encouraged the expansionist Democrats to call for complete annexation of Mexico, all the way down to Guatemala and those areas. Polk recalls Trist in October 1847. There's Trist. Believing that he was on the cusp of an agreement with the Mexicans, Trist ignored the recall order and presented Polk with the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, which was signed in Mexico City on February 2nd, 1848. Under the terms of the treaty, Mexico ceded to the United States 525,000 square miles, 55% of its territory, and they got $15 million for that. And the assumption by the U.S. government of a lump sum of $3.25 million for debts owed by Mexico to United States citizens. Polk would have preferred a more extensive annexation of the Mexican territory. He realized that prolonging the war would have disastrous consequences and decided to submit the treaty to the Senate for ratification. Although there was substantial opposition to the treaty within the Senate, on March 10, 1848, passed by a margin of 38 to 14. There was an opportunity, though, to get more of Mexico in the Yucatan, present-day Cozumel, which is a favorite stop for Texans on the cruise ship. It's generally, if you go down to Galveston, hop on the cruise ship, the first area you hit is Cozumel, Mexico. It could have been part of their country, but the Texans decided to go elsewhere. Following the signing of the 1848 treaty, Polk sought to send troops to the Yucatan, where there was a civil war between the secessionists and those supporting the Mexican government. The U.S. Congress refused his request. The Mexican War was supposed to be short and nearly bloodless. It was neither, and Congress did not support the foreign conflict. Mexico loses, cedes its claims to Texas, and the Rio Grande border was accepted by both nations as the border in 1848. Now, that's my friend Jeff Buren, good friend of mine for over 40 years. We're in San Francisco. We're at the Fisherman's Wharf. And that's if you translate San Francisco into Spanish, it's St. Francis. Well, we didn't eat at Applebee's, right behind there in the Lidos, which we always do in San Francisco. Anyway, San Francisco was part of the Mexican territory called Alta California. June 14, 1846, a ragtag group of about 30 gun-toting Americans entered Samana, small town in the Mexican territory of Alta California. Prepared to take the town by force, all they needed was some brandy. They instead sat for brandy with Colonel Mariano Vallejo of the Mexican Army and accepted his surrender. They got him drunk. I surrender. They got him drunk. For the next 25 days, California was an independent nation. Independent nation for 25 days. It was called California Republic. James Polk wanted it, got it. 2 days later, the Bad Flag Revolt officially ended as California was absorbed into the Union. The Californios formally ceded Alta California in 1847 with the Treaty of Cahuenga. Polk made no secret of his desire to annex California, and he got it. California, here I come, right back where I didn't start in California. Bay Area Bridge, there behind me. In February 1848, Mexico ceded New Mexico and California in return for $15 million and American assumption of damaged claims. Added territory, Well, what was added? California, Nevada, Utah, Arizona, piece of Colorado, piece of New Mexico. From sea to shining sea, James Polk actually accomplished his goals. He made America what it looks like today, from sea to shining sea, the Atlantic to the Pacific. But wait a second, Mexico, bad deal, deal or no deal, ends up being a bad deal. January 24th, 1848, gold had been discovered on the American River near Sacramento, and the ensuing gold rush hastened California's admittance to the Union. With the gold rush came a huge increase in population and a pressing need for civil government. Gold in them there hills, that's the American River outside of Sacramento. Mexico never knew they had all this gold. I wonder if they knew they had this gold, whether they would fight on. But they gave up. And all of a sudden, guess who ends up with the gold? The Americans. And by the way, my two kids there who were about 10 and 8 at the time, no gold. They went panning, but no gold. On December 8th, 1848, President James Polk ignites the California gold rush with an address to Congress. There were rumors about gold being found in California, but California's disputed status during the Mexican-American War and the lack of direct means of communications left an air of disbelief about the incredible tales of wealth in them there hills. Gold! They found gold in them there hills. He didn't, my son. It cost me $1 to get a pan. So he was panning, never got anything. Accounts, this is what James Polk said, accounts of abundance of gold are of such an extraordinary character as would scarcely command belief. The explorations already made warrant the belief that the supply is very large and that gold is found at various places in an extensive district of the county. Wrong 49ers, that's my San Francisco 49ers pass. In 1849, close to 100,000 people went to California from the United States, Europe, and every other corner of the globe. Gold seekers from Australia, New Zealand, Hawaii, and China sailed across Pacific on well-established trade routes. The journey was far more complicated if you lived around here, the East Coast. Well, my wife also panned for gold and didn't find anything. A voyage from the East Coast to California around Cape Horn, 17,000 miles long. It'd take 5 months. Gold might be gone within 5 months. There was a sure alternative. Sail to Panama, risk getting yellow fever. You couldn't get yellow fever there. Cross the isthmus by foot or horseback, sail to California from the Central American Pacific coast. However, until 1850, there was no regular steamship travel in the Pacific, and passengers might find themselves stranded in Panama. It's always yellow fever to look forward to. And for weeks or months waiting for a ship to get up to San Francisco. How many of you worn Levi's in your life? Levi's jeans. That's Levi Strauss. Smart boy. I'm not going with my pickaxe and chop and chop and chop. I'll make some pants. I'll try to sell them. He's still selling them. Those heirs are anyway. Not everyone who came to California during the gold rush planned to earn a fortune by using a pan or a pickaxe in the gold fields. Many enterprising young men and women realized that there was as much money to be made by providing the gold miners with goods and services. The ensuing gold rush transformed California from a region sparsely populated with Hispanics and Native Americans to a bustling economic center controlled by white Americans. California became the 31st state on September 9th, 1850. Well, Mexico's left on its own now. Think of what Mexico has lost. They lost the gold rush. They lost Texas. They lost New Mexico. They lost Arizona. They lost California. They lost all of this land. But they're soldiering on. Benito Juarez. The Monroe Doctrine became the American policy, and it remains the American policy except during the 1860s when the Civil War broke out. The Americans had no time for anybody else in the North American continent. 1861, Benito Juarez was elected the president of Mexico. At the time, Mexico was in financial ruin after years of internal strife, and Juarez was forced to default on debt payments to European settlers. France, Britain, and Spain sent naval forces to Veracruz, Mexico, demanding repayment. Britain and Spain negotiated with Mexico and withdrew their forces. But Napoleon III, good-looking boy, Napoleon III, he said no. France wanted to take over Mexico. Napoleon III decided to use the opportunity to carve out an empire out of the Mexican territory. Late in 1861, a well-armed French fleet stormed Veracruz, landing a large force of troops and driving President Juarez and his government into retreat. About 6,000 French troops under General Charles Latreille de Lorenza sent to attack Puebla de Los Angeles, a small town in east-central Mexico. In the north, Juarez rounded up a ragtag force of about 2,000 loyal men, sent them to Puebla. And here is the battle. And this is the battle that people on Sunday will be celebrating on Cinco de Mayo. A beer for the battle, even though it really didn't mean all that much. The battle lasted from daybreak to the early evening, and when the French finally retreated, they had lost nearly 500 soldiers. Fewer than 100 Mexicans had been killed in the clash. Relax, have a beer. It's Cinco de Mayo. Have a Corona Extra. And that is what's being celebrated. That exactly is what's being celebrated. The success of the Battle of Puebla on May 5th, 1862 represents a great symbolic victory and bolstered the resistance movement. This is Maximilian, Archduke of Austria. One of his heirs, he got himself killed, Ferdinand, and that started World War I. So this family went back a little bit. In 1863, Napoleon invited Maximilian, Archduke of Austria, to become the Emperor of Mexico. Maximilian accepted the offer and arrived in Mexico in 1864. Although Maximilian's conservative government controlled much of the country, liberals held on to power in northwestern Mexico and parts of the Pacific coast. William Henry Seward, Seward's Folly, Alaska, well, he's involved in this thing too. In response to these actions, the Secretary of State of the United States, Seward, issued statements of disapproval, but the U.S. government was unable to intervene because of the American Civil War. Moreover, both Seward and the U.S. President Abraham Lincoln did not want to further antagonize Napoleon III. After all, they are in a war with the South and risk his intervention on the side of the Confederacy. The end of the American Civil War is in 1865, coinciding with the beginnings of success for Juarez forces against Maximilian's. On January 31st, 1866, Napoleon III ordered the withdrawal of French troops to be conducted in 3 stages between November 1866 and November 1867. In 1867, France finally withdrew, almost 5 years after the Battle of Puebla, which was by this point forgotten. It does not end well for Maximilian. No, not at all. Kind of like his heir, Archduke Ferdinand. Maximilian was captured May 1867, sentenced to death at a court-martial and executed, together with the General Miramon and Mejia on June 19th, 1867. Let's have a beer. Let's have a beer. We can go to Nogales and have a beer on the American side, Nogales, Arizona. Probably not Nogales, Mexico. They don't really celebrate Cinco de Mayo. 1989, the San Antonio-based Gambaris Group, who were the regional importers of Corona and Grupo Modelo, launched a Cinco de Mayo theme ad encouraging Mexican Americans already celebrating the holiday to make it a priority on that day to drink Mexican beer. The campaign took off. By 1996, Consuming Corona was a way to celebrate Cinco de Mayo, and was the core way most people acknowledged the holiday's existence. A huge victory for the Corona beer marketers. The next year, the marketing manager of the company, Don Mann, said, "Corona is the first thing that comes to mind when customers think Cinco de Mayo." Cinco de Mayo is a beer holiday, and they pulled it off. Corona beer pulled it off, believe it or not. That's Cozumel. As the holiday has grown in popularity, its connection to the original meaning has continued to weaken, while its excuse to party has drastically increased. Much of this has to do not only with the marketing companies like Corona or tequila. Liquor companies have tequila. It's a drinking holiday, put together by a couple guys in the marketing concern saying, how do we sell more beer? How do we sell more beer? But other beer companies and alcohol companies weren't going to miss out on this opportunity because brands of tequila latched on to the same things of Mexican pride that the Corona ads did. Today, Americans consume more beer on Cinco de Mayo than any other holiday, paired with 100 million liters of tequila. So how is Cinco de Mayo celebrated in Mexico? Hey, when you're in Cozumel, you go to an authentic Mexican food place. Authentic. Real Mexican food in Mexico. Well, in Mexico, it's marked in the state of Puebla with a historic reenactment of the Battle of Puebla, parades, music, costumes, fireworks. But for most Mexicans, May 5th, Cinco de Mayo, no big deal. It's just like any other day. That is Chiapas, Mexico. September 15th is the day they celebrate. Mexicans celebrate their country's independence from Spain most years on September 15th at about 11 p.m. from the balcony of the country's national palace, ringing the bell, Hidalgo rang. The ceremony typically ends with three cries of Viva Mexico, Viva Mexico, Viva Mexico, above a colorful swirl of tens of thousands of people crowded into the main plaza in Mexico City. So basically, the bars make money, the beer companies make money, the tequila companies make money, but the Mexicans don't celebrate the most famous day in America, or most famous Mexican day in America, which is Cinco de Mayo. Any questions, any comments? Anybody have anything to say? If you're a smart marketing person, was that smart marketing?
Yeah.
Corona beer. Anybody ever hear of Corona beer before Cinco de Mayo? Not really. They did what they had to do. So on May 5th, you're going to hear about today is Cinco de Mayo Day, and it's celebrated in the United States. Not really in Mexico.
Neighbors.
Any questions or comments? Well, I hope you enjoyed this little talk. And that's the story of Cinco de Mayo.